Kennedy, thank you for doing this. Been a minute getting you in here. We had to pull some strings to get led into this amazing auditorium.
And why did you choose this auditorium?
Well, honestly, I heard it was where you got your start.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it was went to Waunakee High School, and one of the first things I did was audition for a play my freshman year, and I got cast in a small role as a 14-year-old boy, which was kind of perfect, in The Miracle Worker. And that was, I always knew that I loved theater. I know in fourth grade I wrote my first play and strong-armed my teacher into letting us act it out at school, and she did that, fortunately. And
What was the play?
it was a fable that I had read about a young man named Fernando, and Fernando had these figs that he was trying to sell, and he was having difficulty selling the figs, and that was mainly the story that it went on. And I'll be honest, I don't remember how it ended, but
Do you have it written down somewhere? Saved,
no way. There's no way.
Not in fourth grade.
Not in fourth grade. It wasn't quite that. Didn't know it was that much of a foreshadowing for my future, but
Yeah.
that, so I always had the love of performing, and I'm the youngest of 11 kids, and I grew up watching my siblings perform. My brothers in South Pacific in high school, my sister had the lead in music band, and my other sisters were, also in plays. One of my sisters was in the original Wisconsin Singers, the very first group that was there. We sang as a family in the church choir. Performing was definitely a part of growing up, and what it was modeled to me, and what I saw, and I loved doing it. And so it was no surprise that, when I got to high school and there was an opportunity to do actual plays, that I was going to take advantage of that, and I had a great time with it.
Yeah. So, would you say the first play was here?
The Miracle Worker.
Miracle Worker, okay. And then that was as a 14-year-old sophomore? Freshman. And then where did you go from there? Did you continue to do every spring play, every fall play,
every one act, every play? There was always a conflict between running track and the spring musical that I would always have to work around, or cross country that I ran in the fall around the one act. But I did that. I sang in the swing choir. I played in the marching band. Just really every performance opportunity that I could have in high school, I took advantage of. And so when I went to the UW-Madison after graduating, I auditioned for and got into their acting specialist program. And that started me off, and I got my undergrad. I ended up transferring to Stevens Point because they had a musical theater degree that Madison didn't have. And I graduated undergrad there, and about a year later I went to the College Conservatory of Music in Cincinnati and got my MFA in performance. And for probably the next 10 years, that's what I did for a living.
Yeah. So when you're in a small town like Waunakee, it's a small town.
Yes.
Compared to most of the origin stories don't come from Waunakee. Now there's opportunities all over the place to do acting. There's often different groups and troupes in and around the Madison area. Was that available for you at that time, or was it strictly?
Definitely. There was where the Essen House is, there was a dinner theater called Wilson Street East. And this summer after I graduated high school, I got my first paying gig at Wilson Street East. They did a children's show on Saturday mornings and afternoons, and I got cast in that, and that was pretty cool. Plus, I'd been doing plays at UW-Madison, of course, my freshman year, and Madison Theater Guild was around. There was the Madison Repertory Theater was the Union Theater in town, and they've long since gone. And then the Bartell wasn't there. That is the home for 6 theater groups, but there were definitely opportunities back then to do theater. Okay.
And then, so the youngest of 11, and I know you said your brothers and sisters were active, and your parents as well?
My dad and mom. My dad was an Irish tenor. He had a lovely singing voice, and he loved to sing.
Okay.
And it just, it definitely colored my view of what was fun.
Yeah. Did any of your brothers or sisters, did they pursue kind of the same path you did through the higher education, but also in the arts and that kind of stuff, or were they just, when it's done for them?
Well, I remember my brothers, they used to have a glee club at the UW-Madison, a men's choir, and I remember my brothers singing in that, and there were like, I think 4 of them did it, maybe 3 at the same time, and so it was fun to watch those concerts. My oldest sister Anne was a music major, and she taught music for a while, and then Ellen, who is 2 kids ahead of me, she's 9th, I'm 11th. She got her undergrad and her MFA in voice, and she undergrad at Madison, and then her master's at the Manhattan School of Music, and she pursued a career as a concert and recitalist out in New York for about 25 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Very cool. So we're in Waunakee, where we catch the bug pretty early, you know.
Yep.
And then you get to kind of hone your craft for the next 6-8 years.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, you moved to Cincinnati and started. They call it gig work back then, or
well,
it's kind of what they call it now. But
it's certainly It's certainly being a stage actor predates the gig economy.
Yeah,
but
sure.
that is what your life is. You know, every 3 months 2-3 months you're looking for a new opportunity, because Broadway shows can run for years, but repertory shows, in the resident theaters around the U.S., they'll run for maybe a month.
Yeah.
You get a 2-week rehearsal period, run for a month, and then you're on to the next thing. So I did a lot of work at the Ensemble Theater Cincinnati, which was an equity house. And, while I was there, I would supplement that with teaching, with commercials, with voiceover work, with whatever you could do. And it was a lot of hustling.
But also sounds like a lot of fun.
Nothing like it.
Yeah. So we're in Cincinnati now. We're in that kind of grind. How are you feeling? You're a small town kid from Waunakee, and now you're in like this bustling kind of. Did going through the university systems kind of prepare you for that life? Because you're on your own, and a lot of college kids are struggling to do this and that. So you kind of prolonged that a little bit. When did you feel like it was? First of all, did you ever have doubts that this was going to work out for you? That this was maybe was this like what you needed? Was this fulfilling you the whole time? Or I'm sure there had to be doubts at some point.
There's a lot of how do I say it? Identifying myself as an actor, having that as my identity, even if I wasn't being met with a lot of outward success or wealth or riches or Academy Awards or any of those things that, we tend to associate with actors. Having that as my identity was huge. And considering myself a performer, an actor, an artist was very important to me. And of course there were doubts. After I'd been out of college for a year, I moved to LA and very quickly realized I was out of my element.
Okay.
I was 22. I was, literally just a Wisconsin farm boy, right? And I kind of got my ass kicked. And that was when I decided to get some more training. Because one of the things, I have tremendous respect for my professors because they encouraged me. They did what they could, but there wasn't a lot of successful acting careers modeled for me by my mentors. If you go to work at a company, you have a manager, and that manager probably worked their way up, has a lot of, relevant experience to you in what you're doing every day. But if you're working with a college professor who's never really pursued a career as an actor, and what is expected at an audition? What is expected behavior? What are the tools that an actor needs to do that? And I kind of felt like, while I know that there are some schools that will do showcases and all these things to prepare their people, Stevens Point and Madison didn't exactly do that.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of the hustle part of the job that wasn't really taught. In theater, you're doing things like learning monologues, a 2-minute monologue, and then you get out there and it's like nobody wants to hear more than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
They're just like, can you stop? Whether or not they like you or not, they don't need to hear it. And so,
well, plus they're blowing through 30, 40 people at a time, so 2 minutes adds up quick.
I remember thinking, "Oh my God, you're cutting off my brilliance here." And then
How dare you stifle
and
me?
the first time I cast a play, I'm sitting there and I'm watching the actors, and I'm like, "Yeah, 30 seconds is plenty." It was just so obvious to me, and I wish that they would have said that. I wish they would have talked about, you got to hit the ground running and do this. Don't do any kind of slow burn kind of build up kind of model. No, hit the ground running, because they're probably going to cut you off.
Yeah, it reminds me of the saying, those who can do, those who can't teach. And,
right.
And, they have all the experience in the world, but if it doesn't work for them, they can share the experience, but they're never going to get, they could never convey to you the grind that it was going to be, and,
right.
and disappointment of not getting those. And so that brings me to my next point. Like, there's no Twitter, there's no internet back then. Not that we're old, but we're getting there. Like, that stuff wasn't a thing. So how was it easier not to have the instant feedback? Was it more difficult? Because I'm sure there were articles written about the plays and stuff, and you get some feedback that way, but it definitely wasn't the instant that we have now.
Right, waiting for that review to come out in the paper. Yeah, that was really a lot of times your only feedback. And so I don't know the answer to that. I do know that it used to be, you wanted an audition, you got to show up somewhere. And now every audition I do, and we can talk about that because I'm getting back into it, is just done in my office, with my own little lights and my setup and my iPhone and my editing software, and read the script and ship it off. And on one hand, it's great because I can audition for projects all over the country. On the other hand, so can 5,000 other people. And so there's become this thing where they say, if you get an audition notice, you better get it in within 6 to 12 hours, because they're going to give up. If they say you have 3 days to put this in, by day 2 they're not watching anymore.
They've already watched 10,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and those people can take that and do the same audition 40 times, take the one that is the absolute best, and that's it. Where back in the day, you had your 30 seconds and you better shine. And now it's a little easier, but it's also 10 times harder.
Right. And they used to give you feedback. You do a read and they'd be like, you know what, can you do it less angry? Or can you do it as if, and they give you a note and you do it a second time and you get feedback, and they can see you not at your best and at your best, and if you can adjust and if you can do all that. So I haven't directed anything in years, but I would hate that. I would hate casting a play, certainly, off of a video audition, because I need to see how you work with suggestions and changes and all that stuff.
But also, like, you don't necessarily know the context of what they're looking for in that performance.
Correct.
Like you said, if they see the character or that moment that you're auditioning for as a more subdued or a more relaxed environment or situation, and you read it as the angry guy, okay, you're barely getting 10 seconds of that.
Right.
Where if they're like, okay, you can read, then you have a chance. But now it's really just, the odds are just kind of stacked against you in a sense.
And especially if they say only send one take.
Oh.
Because you can go, well, I'm going to do this one softer. I'm going to do this one, in a different way, and give them options at least.
Yeah. But
when they go one take, because they, for one thing, who knows if they ever watch the second one?
Yeah.
But it's such an interesting thing, and I had an opportunity in October. I was cast in a movie in Chicago, and I played a judge.
Yeah.
3 days of filming, 7 scenes, like sink your teeth into something, not just one line in a commercial, not just, my doctor told me to try this, which is, I'm getting of that age where most of the auditions I get are medical.
Yes.
I just can't stop pissing myself.
It's a lot of you walking with your wife through the woods or something, like along a trail. It's very nice.
I burned the bread. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that is, I have to acknowledge that, but I also have to acknowledge that there's a lot of roles for older white males.
Yeah.
And that's good. But so I was able to do this judge role, and it was so gratifying and satisfying. But even I don't know what takes they're going to choose.
Yeah.
And, they could take takes that completely change the character from what I saw, because as we were doing it, they were saying, do this one, but do it faster, and shut him off, shut him down more, so that they can really make it they can make the character as much as you can with performing it.
And they can really just kind of manipulate every one of those takes to take multiple takes and lay out what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Perfect. So the instant, like, so do you think that the feedback that now comes from more from your peers now, or is it still because you said you got, so how long are those takes that you're sending in for auditions? Are they
Typically 30 to 40 seconds.
okay? So it's still kind of the same thing. Keep it short.
Well, it's what they submit. It's what they tell you to submit,
Yeah.
and they're not going to make you, unless you are being considered for a co-star role or something larger. But if they're considering you for a larger co-star role, they're probably going to Zoom with you.
Yeah.
And that's usually a second or third audition.
And then there is that feedback.
Correct.
Okay. Perfect. That's something I was wondering, because, like, you live in Waunakee, like, it's so far away from Hollywood or LA or anything that, people just kind of, those, especially when I heard that, you were an actor, I was like, really? Like, he lives in Waunakee? Like, this doesn't make sense. But, so, back to that, you're out in LA, you get your butt kicked a little bit, kind of, where do you go to lick your wounds? Back to Cincinnati, kind of?
Well, I had been living here, and then I moved out there. And then when I came back, then during that summer, I auditioned for grad schools, got into Cincinnati, and moved there at that point.
Okay. And then you started doing was that mostly stage work, or was it?
Almost exclusively.
Okay.
I remember I was in my second year of getting my MFA, and I got an agent and got cast in a commercial for the first time, and it was pretty cool because it ran a lot locally, and people were like, "Hey," they were recognizing me, which was really great.
Do you remember what it was for?
Yeah, it was for a radio station in Cincinnati, and I had this ability to manipulate my eyebrows in a way.
Nice.
And at the audition, what they were saying was that the premise of the commercial was that there's a lot of noise in radio, and I had literally a dozen sets of, like, those little foam headphones all over my head, and that you could hear the different radio station, and they kept saying, "How do you break through the noise?" And so I was taking out these headphones, no dialogue, and then at the end I got done with. They said there's only 2 left, and I did this. I went and looked at the 2 of them, and they're like, "Oh, that's it," and that's what got my eyebrows got me the role, but. That was my first paying gig as an actor, or in a commercial. That is.
So then, once that happens, do people come out to you, or did you have an agent at the time?
Yeah.
And then do the agents, like, do they throw everything at the wall, see what sticks, or is it more like, all right, I know Paul's not into that, we're not going to do that, or? Well, because you don't want to get typecast right away as whatever, and I know one commercial is not going to do that, but. Were there clear guidelines that you set down for your agent, or was it like, hey, give me whatever I can get, and then I'll tell you if I want to do it or not?
Whatever I can get.
Okay.
Certainly at that stage. And then I just want to say there's a line in the industry. There's one thing worse than being typecast, and that's being not cast.
Okay. That's fair enough.
So there's a terrific documentary called That Guy Who Was in That Thing. And it's interviewing all these actors who you would recognize 100% of them.
You have no idea who they are.
You have no idea who they are. They're like, oh, that's the guy from
Yeah.
And it was really wonderful to see, and that's where I heard that line. The only thing worse than being typecast is not cast. And there's one guy who always plays bad guys. I think he's from one of the former Soviet republics. And he said, "Ask my neighbors, I'm the nicest person in the world, but I'm always cast as a psycho."
What does John Lovett say? It's acting.
Right, right, exactly. And so, yeah, there'd have to be a lot of reasons for me to turn something down, because it is just acting.
Yeah.
I did some plays with Madison, the Children's Theater of Madison. I got to, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I got to play Tevye and Fiddler, which was a treat.
Yeah.
And then they were doing To Kill a Mockingbird the next year. And the I went in and auditioned, and the director who had directed Fiddler, she said, "Well, I want you in the play." She goes, "Do you think you'd rather play the sheriff or Bob Ewell?" And I don't know if you know the story, but Bob Ewell is the father of the woman who accuses the African American man of rape.
Okay.
And he's an avowed racist and all this stuff. And the sheriff is this really nice guy. And I'm like, oh, Bob Ewell. I want to play Bob Ewell. Are you kidding me? You know, I mean, it was so much more interesting than playing just this nice guy, oh, shucks, sheriff.
Yeah. Well, there's depth to things too. Like, you know, I say I'm a nice guy, but that doesn't mean that I have to be nice. You know, like there's more depth to the nice guy is boring. It really is. And to be able to do something a little bit different is nice. But when those kind of things come up, you know, especially talking about something like racism, it's really easy for you to compartmentalize that from acting to everything else. Because the famous kind of story is Leonardo DiCaprio not being able to say that word in Django Unchained.
Yeah.
Like he really struggled with that until I think was it Sam Jackson's like, dude, that's just another Tuesday. I can't remember the story correctly, you know, completely, but like someone like him who has all these accolades and that had struggled with it, but you're able to just say, dude, it's just acting.
And it is, and you know what? It's my job to represent the words that are on the page, and also to not see Bob Ewell as a bad guy, to see him as a father who, you know, if you could say he's a father who thinks his daughter's been raped, you know, and can you relate to that? Yeah, I think we can all relate to that. And then you can argue with his tactics, with his viewpoints. But at the end, but my job is to perform that, and it's the audience's decision that I'm a bad guy.
Yeah.
I don't think Bob Ewell walks around going, "I'm a bad guy." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you can do that, then suddenly the character you're playing is much more human, and it's up to the audience.
And also, you have to convince the audience that you're not acting. Like that's the big part of it. You know, you have to convince them that it's not Paul Kennedy portraying
that I am acting.
Yeah, but that he's not. That you're just acting, but that this is who he is in his soul, and you have to do that without them knowing that it's Paul Kennedy acting like that. And that's a tough sell.
You know, and the thought about, you know, actors having egos, of course, you know, there's a lot of ego, but my goal as an actor is to disappear as Paul. Is to not, you know, it's not like, you know, the analogy I use is that here's Bob Ewell, here's Paul Kennedy. It's not like let's figure out where they meet. It's Paul has to go all the way to Bob.
Yeah.
Nobody's coming to see Paul Kennedy. They're coming to see Bob Ewell. They're coming to see those characters interact. And so while there is ego, I really think that successful acting, you disappear and the character emerges. And that is when it's really fun. That is when it's really fun.
Yeah, and to know that you've pulled it off and that you've done a good job has to be like crazy and rewarding.
Yeah.
It's what you do it for, right?
And also when you don't. Of course, I had to jump to that.
Yeah. So we're making commercials. We're doing some acting on stage and doing some real. Like, were they big theater houses, or was it a lot of community stuff? Was it
it was
a mix of everything?
It was union. I mean, I was a member of the union, so it was all union stuff. Whether the size of the house, usually a couple hundred seats. It's not I'm not talking about thousands of. It's very rare that non-musical performances take place in large houses.
Right.
There was a lot of that, and then occasionally. We get to audition for a movie or something that came through town, and that was how I got Shawshank. That was shot in Ohio when I was living in Cincinnati.
Well, I didn't want to bring it up, but I mean,
we're talking about
we're talking about it.
Yeah.
So let's hold off on that for a second, because what's the build up to Shawshank? Because we're doing some of the plays, and we're doing some. Was there musicals in there too? Or?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, yeah, you just said Fiddler, but. So we're doing all that stuff. Then how does that come through? Is it like a trade paper, or does your agent say, "Hey, we're casting for this," or is it because you're in the industry, that stuff's happening?
It's often through agents because they don't want to put an open call out there. They want to limit the number of people that they see. They want to see good people. They want to see a lot of people, but they don't want to see every.
They're not looking
person.
For background actors.
Yeah.
Background
and
actors.
So I mean. It usually was through an agent. However, I was doing a production of Streetcar Named Desire in Cincinnati, and the director was a woman named Lynn Myers, and she just came into rehearsal one day and said, "Hey, want to be in a movie?" I said, sure.
Yeah, why
She
not?
said, yeah, they're shooting a movie up in Mansfield, and I just got hired as the local casting director. And so she was able to, she came to me one day and she said, I got the part for you. And she said, you're gonna get your own scene, you're gonna get a close-up, you're gonna love it. And that's what it turned out to be, was the role.
So was that the first movie you were in?
No. I had done a movie earlier that year called Airborne, and if you know who Seth Green is,
Yeah.
I gave Seth Green a driving lesson
Oh, nice.
in Airborne. It was his first movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was 18 at the time, and it was a rollerblading movie about his cousin Mitchell had to move. His parents were going to Australia for work for a year, and they sent him to his aunt and uncle in Cincinnati. And so this poor fish out of water, surfer boy now in Cincinnati, has to prove his worth through rollerblading, which we all have had to do in our life.
Who hasn't had
right?
That's the gauntlet we all go into. So Shawshank has become this like iconic, especially people of a certain age. I don't think a lot of the younger kids have watched it, but there was a time when you couldn't turn TNT on that it wasn't on there, and I think that's what propelled it. But also, there's a great story about how the reason that was on so much is the only one he could afford starting out, and that's why it was on TNT constantly. But there are people my age and younger and certainly older who, like I was telling you before, we quote that movie constantly at our house, especially the parts we shouldn't, do you know how to read? Love that quote. But did you have any sense at the time?
Am I being obtuse?
Yeah, yes. At the time, you're in a scene with Morgan Freeman, amazing. Tim Robbins is there. All these kind of iconic, 30 years later, this just is one of the biggest theatrical, relevances in cultural icons that there is. Mm-hmm. Was there any sense of that at the time? And I know you had a smaller role, but was there a feeling on the set that this was going to be good? Because it kind of flopped at the box office a little bit, because it came out against, I can't remember the movies it came out against, but it came out
Forrest Gump.
And there was one other, I can't remember what it was, but it came out against some blockbusters.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think anybody thought that. And it was, there was a 30th anniversary back in August, and I heard a story from the director, Frank Darabont, who came to the reunion, and he told the story about how, Castle Rock, he sent them the script and they allowed him to direct. He'd never directed before, and I don't think anybody had a sense of it. But it has been talked about that some people say that Shawshank was the best script they had ever read. That the way he had written it and the way it was, and so it did have some buzz in the industry. And this is kind of a left turn here, but he told a story that made me respect Rob Reiner. I have no reason not to respect him, but he told the story that Castle Rock called him after they bought the rights. They said he could direct it, and then they called and said, Rob Reiner wants to direct it. Can we pay you $2 million to go away and just take and Reiner had just directed A Few Good Men, and of course, Princess Bride. Everybody knows Rob Reiner.
Yeah.
I mean, and so he said no. And Rob Reiner called him and said, "I understand, man. Make your movie," which I think is one of the coolest things ever.
Yeah.
He has the muscle to go, "Listen, buddy.
Yeah.
I'm Rob Reiner."
He has the muscle to say, "Here's $2 million," or "Here's nothing."
Right.
I'm doing it.
And instead, and then I don't know if you know this, but Tom Cruise was supposed to play Andy Dufresne.
No, I didn't know that.
And he said, "I'm not going to work with a first-time director. And I want you to direct it." And Rob said, "I'm not. We've already had this discussion. I'm not going to do it." And then he said, "Will you at least be on the set and advise?" And he said no. And so Cruise pulled out.
So there was a lot of flexing going on in Hollywood trying to. So maybe there was the buzz there, but certainly, I don't think anybody could have foreseen what was going on.
No. I don't think anybody did. And I don't, I think they all thought they had a good story. And then when they got Morgan Freeman, that was like, that's kind of cool. And then Morgan Freeman allegedly was the one who talked Tim Robbins into doing the role. And so there was, there was certainly this thought that this would be a good film, but I think that the name was bad, you know?
Yeah, Morgan Freeman actually talks about
Yeah.
that, how nobody thought it was like it's dumb. It's like he does something. A lady walked up to him and said, "I loved you in the Scrimshaw,"
Yeah.
or something or whatever, and he's like, "Thank you," and just moves on. But
Exactly.
yeah, it's and most people don't realize it's just it's based on a 30-page novel. So I mean, it's crazy that has become what it is. But you do that, you got to feel pretty good after that's happening. Was there much after that? Because then your life kind of takes a turn. But was there still much of the acting and kind of the doing the plays and doing the musical, or did that kind of drop off after the Shawshank?
Well, I moved back to Wisconsin within a year of doing that.
Okay.
So I kind of chilled myself a little bit, cooled myself off.
Was it purposeful? Did you just say, "Hey, I need a break from this"?
No, without getting into too much detail, I had some personal setbacks that forced me to regroup and decided to lean on my family to help us get back on our feet again. And so we moved back here, and it was just for a few years. Mm-hmm. And so 30 years later, here I am.
I mean, you still got a couple of years, and
then,
well, you're kind of back at it right now, but. So after that happens, we don't need to get into that, but your life also takes a different toll. You start, one of the things we talk about on this podcast a lot is the drugs and the medicines and the antidepressants and the pharmaceuticals and stuff that we all kind of, especially us who are dealing with stuff, we try to, with the doctor's help, try to medicate the pain away. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it doesn't work. A lot of times it doesn't work. Was there depression after you walked away from that, or was it just a different feeling? Was there just, okay, I know that this is what's going on, this is me stepping up and being who I have to be as a father? Or was it just like, for lack of a better term, was it just kind of a tailspin, kind of, maybe not out of control, but maybe the perception that it was?
I definitely. I mean, there's no question that I struggled for my new identity without having theater, without having performance there. And, probably one of the worst things that I did was I went into sales. And everybody thought, oh, you're going to be good at sales. You're an actor, and I think saying that insults both professions, because there's just this thought that in some ways everybody's being fake. They're not saying, oh, you're an actor because you speak truth and being genuine. No, they think you're an actor because you're faking stuff.
Yeah.
And then they think the same thing with salesmen. So they get to insult both professions and me at the same time by saying that. But it made sense, because I didn't have a fear of speaking to people or any of that. But man, I hated it.
Yeah.
And I would say that I was always a heavy drinker. I always liked to have my cocktails or my beer. But I definitely became a darker drinker at that point. And then when I was 41, I had a heart attack. And the thing that came out of that was that my triglycerides were insanely high, but I did the rehab, I did all that stuff, and then 6 months later, I did a checkup, and they put me on the treadmill and did the picture, and they were like, clean as a whistle. And then 2 weeks later, I had another heart attack. And they just kind of said, we don't know why this is happening. They had some theories that like plaque cells were erupting, or that I had arterial spasm, but it wasn't a classic gradual closing and then a heart attack. And so I came out of that, instead of going, well, gee, I really need to live my life better, I came out of it going, well, screw it.
Yeah. They
can't tell me why. And I would say for the next 18 months, I was just a blackout drunk.
Just at the bottom of the bottle.
Not every day, but when I drank, it was to blackout. And the other thing was that I would go, okay, it's Monday. Can't drink today. I can't drink Tuesday. Okay, Thursday at 5 o'clock is when I can drink. It just became.
You're just planning the chaos.
Yeah, and so even though you can, and you can have an alcohol problem without drinking every day, and I think that I'm an example of that. You can also have an alcohol problem without losing your jobs, without losing your families, without getting DUIs, without going to rehab, none of which I've done.
Yeah.
But I woke up one morning and I just said, I can't keep living like this. We had 30 people at our house for a cookout, and I passed out before they got there.
It's John and I have talked a little bit about it. I don't think we've ever put it on podcast, but living in Wisconsin is tough because from the time you can remember, you know an alcoholic. You know someone who has an issue. You know someone who has a problem. And I think you're right. I think the misconception is that alcoholics or someone who suffers, has a drinking problem, they lose all functionality in their life, and that's just not true. There are people who can pull their shit together long enough to get through the work day, and 5 o'clock, man, they're popping tabs in their car on the way home.
Yep.
So what did this do other than, okay, we have the event at, the party at your house that's 30 people coming over, and your wife's on her own now to get everything ready and to try to get you sober up to.
Oh, I didn't make an appearance.
Oh,
I didn't make an appearance.
Paul's not feeling well today.
Yeah.
Was it and if you don't mind, how did that affect? You have children, you have a wife, you have, everybody has standing in their city, whether they like to believe it or not. How was that? How did you kind of navigate that? Like, it's tough. You have 5 children. You have, at that point, did you have grandkids yet?
No.
Okay. But you're trying to be, are you still trying to be a dad?
Sure.
Or is it checked out? When the alcohol comes, do you check out? Did you check out, I should say?
One of the things that I did, and is that I was pretty good at hiding it, and I a lot of times would wait until everybody was in bed, or I was out for the evening and they weren't going to see me. So I think that they were affected by it, but I also think that. Because I didn't have a lot of those classic trappings of, the having to go to rehab, having to go into detox, the DUIs. I didn't have those outward things. I don't think that it was perceived as being a huge problem in my family. I still did things like coaching my twins in softball and working with the drama group here at high school and stuff. And so I think I did a good job of holding it together. But the bottom line is that I was just miserable.
Yeah.
Just miserable. And the number of mornings that I woke up, just kind of looked around and went, okay, I'm going to go see if the car's in the garage so I can figure out how I got home. Yeah. Okay, there's no dents in it. That was who
There's
I
a lot
became.
of those, made it home, made it, and got it done. So was the barbecue, was that your moment?
Yep.
That was it.
I woke up that morning about 4 o'clock, and the last thing I remember is my wife standing at the bedroom door going, "Why do you do this?" So there's obviously some history there with that. And she just didn't understand why I couldn't stop after a couple, why I had to go to oblivion. And I get that. And so I had worked with a guy about 8 years before, and he had shared with me that he was in AA and that he was sober. And I drove to his office that morning and just said, I need help.
Yeah.
And he took me to a meeting, and July 5th, 2005 is what I consider my sobriety date. I've not had a drink since.
Nice work. How has that been for you? Like, can you just kind of walk us through what that was like from that day? You went to a meeting. Is it like people say you can't cut cold turkey, quit cold turkey? Some people have to. There are those stories. My grandmother was a massive smoker, and 3 packs a day, Pall Mall, unfiltered. She was good. She got so much that she would drive across.
I bet she sounded good too.
Wonderful singing voice. But she would actually, we lived Southern Illinois, close to Missouri. She would drive across the state line to get cheaper cigarettes.
Right.
And drive back across with a suitcase full of, knockoff brand cigarettes because she was just so addicted to it. And there was a doctor's appointment, and the doctor said, either put them away now or You're not going to get to see what would be my cousins, but you won't see them grow up. And that was the last smoke she had. Now, the addiction had her so hard, so absolutely ingrained in her life from 12 years old. She would tell us, she remembers rolling cigarettes for her father, and she'd roll him one and roll her one at like 12 years old, So to be able to just stop, you wonder, like, how were you that strong, but not strong enough to do it at the time? You actually, obviously have a family. What did you lean on? What was that like? Quitting and just being like, I'm done. How is that possible?
I can speak to my experience.
Yes.
I know people like your grandmother. I don't know how people quit a 3-pack a day habit. And I think there's a lot more of that 50 years ago where people were, muscling through things more than they do today. I left my first AA meeting knowing that I had hope and that I didn't have to live like that anymore. That is not a typical reaction, as I've learned. Most people walk out going, oh, this sucks.
Yeah.
I was so ready to be done that I felt nothing but relief. And I took the direction of this guy who became my first AA sponsor, and just leaned on somebody else. And I think one of the things that is such a big deal for addicts, alcoholics, whatever, is isolation. And I was somebody who I was more likely to go to a bar where nobody knew me and sit in the corner and just get polluted than I was to go with a group, because then all of a sudden somebody I know sees how much I drink.
Yeah.
Or, same with like wait until everybody goes to bed and then grabbing the bottle out of the thing and doing that.
Were you a social drinker at one
point? Oh,
sure.
Okay. And I think that I held it together. I think that I was fairly entertaining at parties,
Yeah.
And it was always like, I'm an extrovert, I'm outgoing, so I hit the party like this, and you may come to it like this, and if you've had a few, maybe you can rise to my level. But yeah. I was never, and I think I was fine. I'm sure there were times where I was an ass, where I can't say that. But so I think that one of the things that going to AA and hearing that other people had the same story that I did, and not only that, but much worse.
Yeah.
And when you hear people, you say something at an AA meeting, well, this is, I actually did this one time, and you look around and there's about 12 people going, yeah, what else you got?
Yeah.
And so there was so much fellowship in that. And AA is not perfect by any means. I mean, it's got personalities, it's got people, so it's bound to have problems, But it has been, for the last 19 plus years, it has been a home for me that I am so grateful that I have. And I would encourage anybody who to give it a shot. I mean, there's no dues or fees for membership. You can, as they say, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, and I had that. And you listen to people and they say some cringy things, and you're like, as long as I don't ask AA to be perfect, then I can leave. Again, I have a million pat sayings from AA, and one of them is take what you need and leave the rest, and that is true. And I was at a meeting this morning. I'll go tomorrow. I go probably 2 to 3 times a week. Sometimes I do jump on some online meetings. And if you would have told me 19 years ago that I'd still be doing this, I wouldn't have believed it. But there's so much. It's so much about being with people who understand where you came from or where you were, and then it feels a little ghoulish. But sometimes when a new person comes in and shares their story, and you can hear, yeah, it doesn't get any better, does it?
Yeah.
And hear that story. It's just been really critical for me to be in that group of drunks, and it feeds me, and it can frustrate me, but I know it's where I belong, and I'm so glad that I found my way there. And I'm really glad that at some point I didn't think, I got this,
Yeah.
Let me take it back. And instead just keep leaning on the fellowship of AA has has been just amazing for me.
Do you think that if it hadn't been for the barbecue and for your wife being like, what are you doing? Why do you keep doing this? Do you think if you would have went in there at any level other than what you did, you know, let's say you went in there at rock bottom. Let's say you walk in there at 5%. Do you still think you'd be successful, or do you think it had to be, because a lot of problems with when we talk about addiction is you have to be ready to quit.
Yeah.
But some people trick themselves into thinking, you know, I'm done. You know, that's it, man. That's just enough for me. And then, you know, maybe 5 minutes later, they're like, well, I can have one more.
Right.
And then, do you think that it's absolutely, and not necessary, I mean, but in your situation, do you think you would have been successful if it wasn't at 0?
I think that, knowing me, I needed to be ready. If you had told me I needed to go, I probably wouldn't have gone.
Right.
So if I accept that that's a possibility, that it had to, you know, yes, I had to be the one to make the decision. I don't know why that morning when I woke up, but I think that was one of the worst things that I did. You know, passing out and making Kim cover for me for that barbecue, that was pretty embarrassing.
Yeah.
And like I said, I hadn't had a lot of other, who knows? Maybe if I had had my name in the Waunakee Tribune for being picked up in the police calls,
yeah,
you know, maybe that would have been something. But you know, it never happened. Those things never happened. But
was it something? Maybe not. Maybe I don't know exactly how to word this, but not having those pitfalls that a lot of alcoholics have, not having the DUIs, not having the, you know, public intoxication and not getting thrown out of a local establishment. None of that really happened for you.
Right.
Do you think if that had happened, it would have maybe prompted you to seek assistance earlier? Or do you think that this, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say was that was your moment.
Yep.
Do you think that there was any chance that moment was coming before that? Or do you think that was like your predestined time?
Pick your cliche. You know, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yeah.
When, you know, all those things. And it's also possible that I had blown past 7 or 8 of those moments, and why I grabbed, or 1,000 of those moments. Yeah. Why I grabbed onto this one, I don't know, but I guess it doesn't matter.
No, absolutely. I just wondered if that was something you'd ever gave any pause to, like, why is that moment what it was? You know, because you know, a quote, you know, everything that's happening to you right now has been planning on being happening to you since the beginning of time. So,
that's a little cute for me.
it's a little out there. For me, I don't believe in predetermined, you know, destinies. I don't believe, you know, is there guidance from whatever force is out there? Maybe, I don't know. But you found that moment to be that moment and absolutely hit the brakes, and that's amazing.
And I think the remarkable thing is that I actually went over to John's office and asked for help.
And you sought him out, which is
correct.
Typically not what happens. Most people are told, hey, you have a problem,
right.
Go get help.
But, you know, and that's why I tell people that I'm in recovery, that I'm in AA, that I've been doing this for a while, because you never know when they'll need it. And I'm not suggesting anybody, you know, if anybody needs it today or whenever, but there might be a point, and if somebody knows that they can ask me a question, maybe that's enough. And maybe the answer is, no, you don't have a problem. You're just having a bad day, you know? Yeah. And I don't diagnose anybody. And you know, if they want to talk to me, all I can speak about is my experience. Yeah. You know, there's people who don't like AA because of the meeting formats. There's people who don't like AA because of references to God. There's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons to disqualify yourself. Yeah. And there's just one reason to stay, and that's because you have given up. There's again another expression that I like is when I'm in charge, my best efforts got me to AA. Yeah. And so, you know, to lean on the experience and strength and hope of others is what I heard at that first meeting, and what has kept me coming back. And you know, I like to think that I need to keep going, because if I quit going, who's going to be there for that newcomer in the same way that there was somebody there when I needed it? And so it's such an important part of my life.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to why I do this and why I seek out. You could go and talk to whoever you want to talk to. My problem with some of the podcast formats right now, and I said this before, it's the ones that are really popular are the people who are rich or popular or whatever, doing their rich popular thing,
right,
and letting you have a little glimpse of what their life is. Oh, I was at a party and I did this with this. That's awesome, but man, there's not much there. Once you unwrap that, there's funny stories, there's some humorous anecdotes, sure, but this to me is me being able to talk to whoever's across the table, but also to whoever's listening. And kind of like you said, it's that if I can be there for them, maybe they don't have to find a reason not to be there. Men don't talk about their issues. We don't like to lay our stuff out there. And for me, I don't mind it. I'm so perfectly imperfect that I don't mind sharing all this stuff, because like you said, there's somebody who may need to hear that. And if I'm not there for them, who is going to be there for them? So we talk about stuff that people don't want to talk about, because sometimes just hearing somebody else is just as effed up as you are is enough for them to say, hey, I'll get through the day.
Just as effed up, but and walking around and surviving and healthy, and I've got a great family. I've got people in my life who I love and who love me, and I don't know that would be the case if I was still behaving in that manner.
Because there's so many people that just don't recognize it until it's way too late, until you've lost everything of substance in your life. We're not talking wealth, not talking about whatever, but the people who love you for who you are until you're not that person anymore.
Yeah.
So, 19 years sober.
Yeah.
Shawshank reunion just happened.
Yeah.
Walk us through that, because that's kind of where we led to where we kicked off with the portrayal of a new judge.
About a couple of years ago, I got an agent in Chicago. I decided that I need. One of the things that I hate is that my grandkids don't know me as a performer. It's still such a big part of my mind and of who I think I am. And I was taking one of my granddaughters to, I think it was, volleyball practice or something. And the radio was on, and I started singing along, and she said, "Did you ever sing?" I'm like, oh my God, you know what I mean? I was like, wow, you're 13, and that's not even a part of who I am to her. And that bothers me.
Yeah. Well, when I had heard, talking to one of your daughters at a football game, because your grandson is one of my son's best friends.
Yeah.
And so many of your grandchildren are friends with my boys, and my wife and I have become friends with your family. And, just talking to your daughter, and she's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
That's who, how is that possible? This is, but I see what you're saying. It was such a huge part of who you are, that this other stuff, the job you have now and the other stuff has just become so secondary, but to them, it's all they know.
Right.
So and then I'd asked you about it at another football game, and then you told me about the reunion coming up, and it was funny to see just the absolute delight in your demeanor as you were talking about what you were going to do this summer. And so how did that go? I mean, walk us through that, because it's kind of a cool thing, because we talked about how iconic that is. And when you're like, that's 30 years, I'm like, holy, that's a long time.
It was beyond cool. A few things happened. There was a panel on Friday night. There were 9 actors, and the director and then the production designer were there. We were all on stage. And, people asked if any of the stars were there, and I'm like, I just told you I was there.
Yes.
But anyway,
Put some respect
yeah,
on Paul's
exactly.
name. Let's go.
But like Bob Gunton, who played the warden, was there. Gil Bellows, who played Tommy, the young punk. Clancy Brown, who played Hadley, the guard. So there were some recognizable people there. But Ben Mankiewicz from Turner Classic Movies was moderating the panel. And in the green room, I went up to introduce myself to him because I was going to be on stage. I figured he should know who I was. And I said, I'm Paul Kennedy. And he said, so what part did you play in the movie? I said, I was the foodway manager. And he goes, do I have to ask you if I need to take a piss? I'm like, there it is.
There it is.
There it is. People know that line, man. And just hearing the stories, Bob Gunton he was the warden, and he was in a cab in Chile. And he said the taxi driver looks at him in the rearview mirror. He looks up again and goes, "Am I being obtuse?" And so the movie had reached, and then I signed autographs for 2 hours at the grocery store, and there was people lined up to get my autograph because I was the grocery store manager.
How does that feel?
Well,
because I know you enough to know that you're not that egotistical, scarf. Maybe you are a little bit. I've seen you wear scarves. So.
Here's what it said to me. It just I knew people liked the movie. Mm-hmm. I didn't know people would be showing me a picture of their Shawshank-themed wedding cake.
Really?
I didn't know people would be from Japan, not speaking English, asking for my autograph. I didn't know that people would be like, okay, get the camera. Will you say a line to me? And they would, ask me to say, you don't have to ask every time you need to take a piss. And it just was so funny. Yeah. And so seeing how people react to the movie, it was really cool because I felt a little bashful about going. Because again, one line in a movie is cool. One line in a movie as big as Shawshank is really cool. But if I'm leading every conversation with it 30 years later, that sounds like the high school quarterback, who could have made it. And so it just was gratifying to see how much people love that movie. Yeah. And I had one. I went to I had a dinner with these people who were on this panel, and Frank Darabont, the director, was there. And at one point he had an empty chair next to him, so I went and sat next to him and just wanted to chat with him for a minute. And he just said, he goes, people underestimate how hard it is to come in and say one line that fits in a movie. And he goes, you really nailed it. Oh my God. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Can you call my granddaughter and tell her that? Like, let her know?
It was just so cool to have him say that to me, And so the whole weekend turned out to be a real great thing.
Yeah. One of the things that like I said, when your daughter told me that, is it just became automatically endearing that's not something you talk about. Mm. Like, there are people who that would be, their opening line every time they walked into a room. Hey, I was this is who I was. But it's such a huge thing that isn't even the big thing in your life, which is amazing. That you don't constantly bring it up. That I have to bring it out. I have to ask you to bring it out, which is cool. So you have these people who absolutely see you as the character. Like, we kind of talked about that before. They see you as this. They want to just have that. Even your signature is something, that's making their day, which is awesome. Did you allow any of that to kind of? It has to stroke your ego a little bit, right?
Sure. But
then when you look at the big picture of what that is, I mean, it has to almost be, I don't want to say unbelievable, but it has to be almost like you have to enjoy the moment of that. But also then you got to come back to Waunakee the next weekend. And I'm not shitting on Waunakee. I love this place, but it's so far removed from what that could be, you know.
And given the fact that within a year I wasn't doing that anymore, there is the thought of feeling like a missed opportunity to build on something. One of the things about, I shoot one scene in a movie in August of '93. The movie comes out 8 months later. You don't get any instant gratification from shooting a movie role.
Right.
And the thing in Chicago that's shot in October, I have no idea when and if that's ever going to be released. Yeah. And I'm just fingers crossed on it. But
Can you kind of back up and talk about how that conversation happened?
Just audition came through my agent. They were looking for a judge, a 60-something judge, and what was really surprising to me was that, I mean, it was a SAG film, so because I'm a Screen Actors Guild member, and is that I did the audition and I got offered the part. There wasn't a second audition. There wasn't
really?
They just offered me the part, and then I had done this audition scene, and then I get the whole script, and I'm like, holy cow! I'm in 7 scenes.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
With a long dialogue.
Yeah, that's so cool. And one of the scenes is in the judges' chambers with the 2 attorneys. It's probably a 3-minute long scene. And to get that chance to not just pop in one line and go, here are your files, Mr. Penske, and actually get to do something where you've got some development. And there's such a wonderful, there's a great video of Tom Hanks saying, show up on time, know the text, and listen. That's what an actor has to do.
Yeah.
And it's really simple, but a lot of people don't do it. And there was the scene that we shot over and over again because they shoot it from your point of view, from their point of view. You shoot these scenes 15, 20 times. And I was dealing with these files. The guy pleaded not guilty. I say, let the record show he pleaded not guilty. I write something down, put it aside, bang the gavel. Do it again. Restore, same, gavel. Grab the thing, do the thing. And there's just something wonderful about that. And you got to do it for continuity's sake, so that they're not watching the scene and they're seeing your water glass jumping in levels.
Yeah.
All those things that happen in movies, goofs. And I wanted it to be perfect. And so just to sit there and practice that motion and get to do it 10, 12, 15 times.
Because even the slightest deviation is noticeable.
Yeah.
Especially when you're...
It can ruin a take.
It can.
They're in editing and they're like, oh, we can't. He's got the wrong tie on.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Yeah. So you have to be careful about those things.
So you're sitting down in Chicago, let's makeup chair, you're in your wardrobe. Was there any point of view that's just like, did it automatically take you back to those first days in the gym or in the auditorium here where, you know what I'm saying? Like, was there kind of this, circle of life, holding up Simba, singing Lion King stuff? Was it any of that, or was it just like, I'm going to let this, take it in for the day and then process it later?
A couple things. There was so much gratitude for the opportunity. I mean, I was so excited, and I really had a great time. The other thing was that they said, I got offered the job on Wednesday, and they said, we're shooting in the courthouse on Saturday and Sunday, because obviously they needed.
Yeah.
And then I get a call saying, when you're on set tomorrow. I said, what? Like, we need you on, we're shooting the judges' chamber scene tomorrow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
And so I was in line learning panic, and it gave a lot. I was just, the whole time I was in the makeup chair. You mentioned the makeup chair specifically. Yeah. The whole time I'm in the makeup chair, I'm just going over my lines, and doing that because I feel like it's really important for me to be letter perfect with the script. Because as I remember when I said before, I need to come 100% to the character.
Yeah.
I don't need to bring the character to me.
Right. Yeah.
And every word I change is probably going to be Paul and not the judge.
Right.
I'm going to use a word that Paul would use and not the judge. And so I need to make sure that I am most like the character by using the words that are written on the page and not deviating from them. And there's again, like doing the motion, doing that, there's just putting that structure and that framework around your performance really helps it, because you're not winging it. You shouldn't just wing it. You got to know what you're doing. You also have to be present. Like I didn't know what you were going to ask me here today. I need to be open to that. Yeah. But I also had some notes about the things I wanted to say.
Yeah. Well, and also you ad-lib in one, now you're ad-libbing it in 20 takes.
Right.
And it has to be the same. And it's something, like you said, you don't know that that's what your character would say or where that line gets drawn. But so you didn't have a lot of, was it like almost, it happened and then we had to do it and then I get home on Monday and then have time to absorb it? Or was it, have you still kind of, is it still kind of in the back of your head, like how the hell did this happen?
Yeah, I think so. I think, part of me feels like I deserved it because I did the audition and they cast me.
Yes.
And so, and it's not, it's so funny. The number one question of people, like back when it was, I was back in Waunakee and people would see Shawshank and they'd be like, was that you or that was you? And the first question was always, how do you get something like that? That's always, always the question. And it's like, well, I was an actor. I had an agent. It wasn't just...
Yeah, nobody just saw you walking down the street and was like, oh, he'd be a great
Exactly. And that the number of times that Overnight Success has been doing it for years and years and years, right?
Yeah.
And so there was a lot that went into that one line, if you want to do that. And to me, some of the irony is that, I was working on Streetcar Named Desire, classic American play. Yeah. When I got cast in this film, and nobody says, "Oh, you're in Streetcar. How was that?" No, it's how was the one line in Shawshank?
Yes.
I had an opportunity to. I don't know if you know where Edward Albee is. He wrote "Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf." Mm-hmm. He won 3 Pulitzers. He's one of the greatest American playwrights of the 20th century. I got cast by him in plays of his twice, including like a world premiere. He cast me, and worked. He cast me as a lead in his show. I got to work with Arthur Miller, who wrote Death of a Salesman. I got to work with his daughter, Rebecca, and she cast me in a play called After the Fall that is kind of an autobiographical take of Arthur Miller's marriage to Marilyn Monroe. And so I played the Arthur Miller character in this. And it's like, that is something that I wish everybody would have seen.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you had one line in Shawshank, huh? You understand?
Yeah, like, to me, of course, like I said, we've watched that movie over and over ad nauseum, but and not to diminish it because it's an amazing thing, but it's not the biggest thing in your your resume or your repertoire or your life. There's all these other things that you are just as much proud of as you are of that, and that's the one thing, like you said, that gets the recognition. But there's all those other things that you've got to be just as proud of, or maybe even more proud of, that you were able to do some of these things that the average person doesn't, because every year the Tony comes out, right? The Tony Awards.
Yeah.
It's a blank canvas, man. I have no idea what they're talking about. But there are people who live in that world who that's amazing to, and you have been able to be in both those worlds where you're Paul in your hometown, but you're also now Paul, who's been in this movie, in these other movies that, one of them's bigger than the other one, but also you've done these things. But also that's kind of a small portion of the Paul Kennedy actor. That's such a small thing because you did all these other things that were just living in the moment. And to me, I always think back to, I appreciate the grind a lot more than I appreciate the success. I think, whether it's sports or whether it's anything, you're writing or doing this, when this is happening, this is the easy part. The booking and the trying to find things to talk about, making those damn videos that I really struggle to make. Those are the hard. This is the reward for all that hard work, but I enjoy the hard work more than I enjoy the gains, maybe, if that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but I think that's a great point in the day-to-day work. And one of the things that I thought about was that you brought up, everybody's got all these facets to their life, and you have no idea what one facet of your life that any person may think about you. There's people who think of me as the Shawshank guy. There's people who think of me maybe as their neighbor, who hopefully helps keep the yard looking good. And what one thing do people know about you that they focus on? When I started my consulting business in 2012, my first 2 years were all in California. And the number of times to this day I run into people who are like, "Oh, you moved back from California?" I'm like, "Never moved there.
Yeah.
I was working there."
Yeah.
And but something in their mind associates me with 2013 and 14 working in California. And that's so true of other aspects of your life. And so to me then it comes down to empathy and recognizing that everybody's got a story. Mm-hmm. And Are you going to hold on to that one thing that you know about these people, good, bad, or indifferent, or allow them to have a full life in your mind? You know, Bob Ewell, you know what words he says, but if you were a real person, you know, there's more than just being a racist to Bob Ewell.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many different layers to everybody's lives. Like you said, there's so many facets. We pick out those one things, and then sometimes you can't let go of that. Sometimes, you know, if I see you in the street, you are this person to me, no matter what other accomplishments you have.
Right.
And that's more on me than it's ever going to be on you. But I think that we're also wrapped up in us, in ourself, that we oftentimes don't give time enough to change the perceptions that we've already made. You know, you are always going to be that because I didn't take the time to get to know you better. You know, when you know, your daughter talked about, you know, this is my dad and this is what he did, that was fascinating to me. But also, like, I've gotten to know you so much more than just that guy. You know, you still haven't invited me to a baseball game. I'll get over it. I mean, it's fine. We don't have to go. Don't worry about it.
You're a Cardinal fan.
I know. And as soon as you're able to accept how much more important that part is than being a Brewers fan, but yeah, I mean, we can go anytime. I mean, I'm sure we'll let you win. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's hard to be a Cardinals fan right now, by the way. It's a little rough, but I've gotten to know you a little bit more than that. I've gotten to know you, you know, through your grandkids as grandpa and that kind of stuff. So it would be easy to just get stuck in that if you're not willing to. And so many other people have so much going on in their lives that they, you know, we talk about the, you know, main character syndrome, or, you know, or the, you know, just the living in my own space. And I think once we stop doing that, and even if it's 5-10 minutes a day, just get to know who that person is. But it's tough because we're all so jam-packed with our own stuff.
Yeah, and then you become responsible for it. You know, if you you know, if you allow somebody to share, you know, things in their life that, you know, are difficult or giving them problems, then you got to own that, and it becomes a lot. You know, I hear a lot of stories in meetings, and you know, there's just times where, you know, you engage with people, maybe have coffee with them after the meeting and talk, and it's really, you know, we stereotype because it's easy. It's a time saver. It's a real time saver to you know, pick one aspect of somebody and think about that. And I think allowing yourself to be vulnerable with that. I was my dad, you know, was a farmer. You know, we milked cows and had a dairy farm, and my brothers and I were out for dinner last summer, and we were talking about how you always had to put a tool away clean. You were not allowed, you know, to use the shovel, you washed the dirt off. If you used the manure spreader, you scraped it. I mean, Dad insisted that all of our stuff be clean, and you know, through our eyes as kids, you know, we look back, it's like, boy, you know, he was real solid. And I said to my brothers, do you think Dad had anxiety? You know what I mean? Yeah. And you know, it's things that we talk about now that they never would have talked about, even when we were kids. You know, none of that. You know, my friend, I had an actress friend who miscarried. Actually, her child was stillborn. This was many, many years ago. The child would probably be, I don't know, 40 or in her 40s or 50s now. And so it was a long time ago, and she was in the hospital for a few days. And when she came home, her parents had stripped the nursery. There was no trace, and they thought they were doing it to help her. Yeah. And she just said it devastated her. Yeah. And you think about that, that was the approach to mental health, was wipe away all evidence of it.
Well, I jokingly say, you know, that white guy from the Midwest, man, we don't talk about our feelings. We push them down until we have a heart attack at 54, and then we find God and go to Mrs. Dash instead of Salt. I mean, it's a terrible way to look at it, but back in the day, you didn't talk about your feelings. Guys didn't cry. Guys didn't share their feelings. Women were, you know, they were expected to be a certain way, and any deviation from that was some sort of perceived as an illness or a disorder. We didn't talk about it. Yeah, our parents probably all had mental health issues, or at least, you know, issues in their life that needed some psychiatric, help.
Right.
I jokingly say everybody should see a therapist, but it's starting to get where it's not a joke. Like, I think there's so many beneficial things to any sort of psychiatry, any sort of mental health. I talk about this a lot. Just going for a walk is so helpful sometimes. Just putting everything on pause, taking a walk through the woods, whatever you have to do. But back in the day, they didn't do that, man. You woke up, you did your stuff, you went to bed. Maybe you had a little nip of brandy before to help you sleep, and then that was it. But I looking back on my parents' lives, I'm like, well, what was going on in their life?
Right.
But we didn't talk about it back then. It's only become a safe place to talk about it over the last couple of years here, where the mental health profession has become. I think it's it's the best thing we have for what it's worth, but there's so much need for it. We can't fulfill it quick enough, and there's a lot of people out there who I share this with everybody. I passed on several therapists because I knew the need for some other people, and I thought I could hold my shit together longer. It took a breakdown from a good friend to say, hey, you can't win this battle, you need help, until I finally.
Is it helping?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I credit him with saving my life, because I think had I not heard that in a time when I needed to hear it, we just got back from Florida. I stood on the edge of a balcony ready to jump, and was very proud of myself for not jumping, for beating that guy back, And Chris just said to me, he goes, listen, you can't hide from that guy.
Yeah.
That guy knows everything about you that you hate. Everything about you that makes you not want to be you anymore, that guy has instant access to. You are never going to beat him by yourself. And I'm like, joking, kind of blowing it off. I'm like, it's not really, something. He goes, I can tell you right now, 12 people that we are very close friends with who all seek some sort of professional help. You need to get help before it's too late. And I did.
Yeah.
And, I kind of fought it the first couple of times, like, oh, this is dumb. Like, where's your tweed jacket? Where's your pipe? How come I'm not laying on a couch here,
Tell me about your mother.
Yeah, exactly. Like, where you hugged a lot as a child. That's what we all expected, but it really has become, my conversations with Sydney have just become so powerful and so empowering as a being, to be able to know that it's okay not to be okay. That's a cliche, but it's very true. But also to have that person who is, you could talk to your wife, you could talk to your buddies, you could talk to whatever, but to have somebody who's unobjectively there for you,
mm-hmm.
and just to be able to spout off and them say, hey, you know what, it's valid to feel that. Here's what we need to do the next time it comes up. To me, it's been amazing, and but I know not everybody is willing to do that. I know some friends who won't get the help they need because of the negative connotation that they've been taught since they could walk. Back in the 90s and 80s and 70s growing up, we didn't do those things.
Right.
And if you did, you were crazy.
You remember Thomas Eagleton?
No.
Thomas Eagleton was George McGovern's first choice for vice president in '72. And it came out that he saw a psychiatrist and he had to step down from his, what kind of message is that?
Yeah.
You can't be trusted with the presidency. You saw a psychiatrist. So that's
now in 2025, you don't see someone? What the hell's wrong with you?
Well, and I think that let me see. I think isolation is the worst thing for most people. Mm-hmm. And I understand if you're an introvert, that's one thing. There's a difference between introversion and isolation, but the fact that it is so much easier now to isolate, I think, than it used to be. Where you needed an apple, you had to go to the store. You didn't have Walmart deliver it.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. And again, I'm not one of those people who does things like things in the past were better, things today are worse. Kids today, I don't do that. But I do think that there are some changes that are happening that make it difficult for good mental health. And isolating is probably one of the biggest ones, I think.
And like you said, it's so easy. Yeah. Everything is a phone call or a click away, from your meds to your groceries to instant entertainment, every movie that's ever been made. My cousin or my nephew was here last week, and he had this, probably shouldn't say it, but he has this jailbroken converter box. He pulled up, there's 38,000 movies available to him at the touch of a button.
Yep.
Like, it would have taken me longer to find a movie than it would have taken to watch the movie. So, yeah, so your mental health is right at your fingertips, and let it slip through as you may. But, Paul, we are getting real close to being way too long on time.
Agreed.
But we'll do this again, because this is fun.
Right.
Talk to people that are just as messed up and realize they're in a much better place than they were. That's what this is all about. And it's been fun, because I like the conversations, that are deeper than, hey, what'd you do today? So before we go, though, is there anything, that you want to tell us at the end there?
Let me see.
Check your notes.
I think I got it. I think that, I want to say that I saw your short video about the limited amount of time that we have. When you talk about if your parents live another 20 years, maybe, if you see them twice a year, that's like 40 hours. And I think that I was riding on a plane back from work. I can't remember where I was coming from, and I was just chatting with the guy next to me, and he was probably 30. And I said, he said, I'm going home to visit the folks. I said, any occasion? He goes, no, I just realized that I have a finite amount of time with these people, and I need to maximize the amount that I see them, because, and then if you extend that to life, we have a finite amount of times we're going to see or do everything on this earth.
Yeah.
So it's one of the reasons that I wanted to get back into theater. I mean, I always joke that I don't want my obituary to read that Paul was a Packer fan.
Yeah.
If that's all you can say about me, then
yeah,
I got a problem with that.
I have the same thing. Mine is, if mine says I was a really hard worker, man, did I fail. Man, did I fail. This is fun, buddy.
All right.
Appreciate it so
Thanks.
much.
All right.
Be good.